All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and aloha. This morning, we're privileged to have distinguished panel members attending here to talk to us about 5G, proving viability in the Indo-Pacific. We ask out of respect to our panel members and others attending the discussion that you take this moment to silence your cell phones and personal communication devices. Bios for this event are available in the TechNet Indo-Pacific app, so we'll refer you there for bios. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Stephanie Hutch, President, Mackay Defense. Stephanie Malia Hutch is the CEO of Mackay LLC, a native Hawaiian-owned 8-alpha firm that specializes in DoD weapon system integration and wireless and wired network modernization. Mackay is working collaboratively with the U.S. Army, Marine Corps, and Special Forces customers to develop 5G architectures to address various national security data transmission challenges. Stephanie is also founder and chairwoman of the board for Kekoa Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Hawaii whose mission is to support and advance overall welfare and economic condition of Native Hawaiians through STEM education initiatives in the community and programs. At this point, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great conference. I really appreciate everyone, spending your time with us here this morning. So I'll just take a few minutes to introduce our panelists, and then we'll jump right into the discussion. So next to me here is Manny Youssef. He is the Chief Cloud and Edge Architect for Dell Technologies Federal Systems. He has been with Dell Technologies for over 6 years. Manny has also worked with multiple software companies in roles such as strategic consulting and services. Prior to his time in this vendor space, he worked directly with the DoD supporting multiple advanced project agencies. Next to Manny, we have Bobby. Bobby Perkins has commercial and DoD experience building wireless technology with multi-partnered ecosystems and deploying various wireless communication systems. As a prior naval operations officer, Bobby served in advisory roles that provided intelligence and technology expertise to 5G, SATCOM, IoT, zero trust architectures, carrier solutions, and C5 ISR technologies. And then last but not least, we have Will Fong. Will is an engineer for the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, now WICPAC, in Hawaii, in the Indo-Pacific Department. Currently, Will is leading research and development efforts to deploy 5G network test beds for the DoD to military bases on Oahu and at Naval Air Station Whidbey Island as part of Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM 5G initiative, sponsored by OUSD. Within the 5G Future G program, which started in June of 2020. Thank you very much, panelists. Welcome.
Thank you.
So for those of you that joined us in April, you will recognize Bobby, Will, and myself. We're very happy to have Manny join us and come back to continue our discussion related to 5G within the Pacific region. So I wanted to start my first question directed at Will. Looking from a government perspective, what are some of the capabilities and features within 5G that the DoD is looking at exploring in the near term, so within the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, so thank you for that great question. I'd like to frame my list of 5 here in the fact that we're all here today in support of the warfighter here, our customer. So if you were here with us last time, I asked you to keep count in case you got bored of how many times I listed the sponsor, OUSD R&E. So this time, if you get bored by our conversation today, please keep count of how many times we list the warfighter and our customer and who we need to serve. So thank you. So one of the things that I'm thinking of are the 5G features which enable ease of use. So you have to think, and I see a lot of young folks over here in this section, Gen Z represent, right? No? Okay. So the technology has to be easy enough to use for folks who are just coming out of boot camp. So you're thinking 18-year-olds, folks who don't know one thing or another about networking, other than maybe what they've done on their Wi-Fi and things like that. So one example of this is virtualization in 5G. I'll give an example recently that we did a demo for the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, where one of my engineers actually kicked the power off of our transportable system, and the CSAF was walking right towards us. So we had very little time to get everything back up for the demo. But fortunately, when we plugged the system back in about 11 minutes, everything was up and running, and our demo was a go for the CSAF. So we need technology that's easy to use as that. So that's a challenge I would pose to our industry partners. Another thing that's a very hot topic is 5G technologies that enable fixed wireless access. So when you think of Indo-Pacom and our missions, and I'm sure you've heard this like pounded down through this conference, is the idea of places versus bases. So you're not, in the real world, you're probably not going to be deploying to locations that have trenched fiber already. So you're going to need to set up that network connectivity and be able to complete your mission without all of that infrastructure in place. So the way that you enable that is something that's very important. And I think some ways to do this in 5G standard is that you have software-defined networks, cloud-native networks, things that you might bring with you on-prem to enable that networking connectivity when you might not have that backhaul all the way to the DODIN. Another thing I might just throw out there is O-RAN. That's a very hot topic to enable that, as well as dynamic spectrum sharing. Something that we're seeing a lot as well in industry is open source tools. I think there's great interest in that because as government, you know, we like to say that we're afraid of vendor lock, you know. So being able to use open source tools in defending and managing the networks and how you might apply that to other areas of the mission are very important to us, I think. Not that I speak for the entire DoD, these are just, of course, my learnings as I've gone through this 5G program through the 2 years. So obviously other folks may have other ideas, but these are the things that we've found to be most interesting. In that vein, with so many tools out there and available, and as we try to open up this environment for true American ingenuity, which I think gives us strengths over our near-peer adversaries, all of these variety of tools, we will need to be able to use together. So they need to be interoperable. How do you link all of these tools together so that your 18-year-old person can operate them and complete their mission effectively in a way where they're not essentially getting a master's degree in 5G networkings and services? And then the last thing I'll point out is things that enable our workforce modernization. I think we've all lived through the pandemic. I feel like that's a safe assumption to make there. So we've seen major shifts in the way we do work. And if you're fortunate enough, you're able to experience remote work, or maybe should I say unfortunate enough. So just that paradigm shift of how we're working now, I mean, if I'm being honest, I onboarded in the pandemic. So I didn't even meet my coworkers for a few months until like I actually went on a trip with them. But we were still able to complete our mission. So 5G technologies that enable that, I think, are crucial to the way that we move forward as a department. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Will. So, Will, you talked about making technology more user-friendly and easier to use. So, Manny, I would look to you, from a Dell perspective, what types of things are Dell Technology working on?
Very good follow-up. So from the perspective of that ease of use that you were kind of bringing up, that's something from the vendor perspective that we're definitely looking to push further forward, right? Because as new technologies come about, limiting complexity as we deploy to a lot of our customer environments is going to be a key focus area. As we not only simplify processes and include software-defined everything type solutions, right? Not just how we build those capabilities and those solutions out, but most importantly, how we deploy and how we provide that capability, because once it's been put in place, it's not necessarily us that's managing that solution. We have to step away so that, the folks right out of boot camp, the 18-year-old, as you mentioned earlier, right, that has to manage these systems, they may not have all the training necessary out of camp to be able to manage that. So simplifying these processes and the solution sets is definitely something Dell and industry is focusing on, providing new capabilities to limit a lot of the dependencies across infrastructure, simplifying a lot of the, as I mentioned, software-defined networking capabilities, so that if there is an issue within a system or a component, right, I don't have to rebuild an entire system set. I can kind of replace modules from an infrastructure perspective. I'm working with immutable data. We're providing capabilities so that if something were to quote unquote blow up from a systems perspective, right, it's quickly replaceable without having to wait for an engineer to come out from an OEM or a software vendor, however many days later, depending on how far out at the edge you may be. So that's definitely something we're focusing on as a vendor.
Thank you. So Bobby, I know for your company, you have an enterprise-wide deployment with the Navy. So what are some real-world DoD use cases you're seeing for 5G right now?
Sure. So thank you very much for having us, coming back as a panel. I'm very thankful for that. So thank you, FCA, as well as Stephanie. So some of the use cases that we see as we look at 5G, number one, I'd like to kind of hone in on, really this is the modernization of mobilization. Yes, the 5G is the buzzword, it's a new network, it's a new waveform, but some of the use cases here that I think are really relevant to Indo-PACOM, being able to provide a 5G resilient architecture across coalition forces that also supports some of our missile defense systems. That also includes perimeter defense solutions, remote locations, SCIFs, and then also when you look at this converged environment, you're not just talking about 5G, you're talking about Link 16, Link 22, HF, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi 6, Zigbee, LoRaWAN, and other wireless technologies that are part of this converged infrastructure. As we've heard all this past week, is being about being able to communicate over multiple domains. And part of that, 5G does have that capability, being able to communicate and interconnect RATs, R-A-T-S, radio access technologies, through different open air interfaces. So when you look at what some of the use cases, for example, real-time situational awareness and command and control beyond line of sight, and 5G being an extra network and layer of transport that can actually provide comms out at the edge, not just for sensors, unmanned sensors and ground sensors, but that also could be for chemical, biological, high-yield nuclear explosive sensors here in Indo-PACOM, where we know where the plume may be coming from, and then be able to provide an evacuation route according to where the plume is coming from. Another use case that 5G does work very well in the construct is fleet readiness. We have Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam here. We knew what happened a couple of years ago with the USS Bonhomme, unfortunately, and the lack of communications below our naval ships, meaning below deck. Being able to have a mesh device-to-device and or other sensors capability below decks can also help the communication above deck and pier side to be able to communicate when there is an emergency pier side or even afloat. So being able to have 5G below deck, is it possible? Yes. There's platforms and protocols, one specific called MBRI, Mobile Broadband Radio Interconnectivity. It's a protocol that allows a mesh capability over a secure net, very similar to Wi-Fi. Actually has the OFDM Wi-Fi standard built into it, but also is part of the 5G net as well. A couple other things that I wanted to bring up too. We're looking at just the use cases, right? So when we're looking at the use cases, we're talking about higher bandwidth, low latency. Those are the two buzzwords that we've heard all week. But the other piece of that is Release 16 and Release 17. We have a lot of SATCOM providers here. We've seen Iridium that comes to mind off the top of my head. There's L3 Harrison. There's several others that are part of the Link 16 and JADC2 construct. But part of the use case around 5G as itself is being able to interconnect ground domain and non-terrestrial domain networks. So you have your SATCOM, you have your Link 16, Link 22s, and you have your different types of radios that have been already deployed, and you have legacy systems that are out there, the P25s, upcoming the 160s, et cetera, HF radios, and so on, that have to be converged into an extending 5G network as well. So from a fleet readiness standpoint, I also wanted to say that you're also looking at not just pure side communications, but also aircraft ground equipment. And part of that is being able to manage and maintain and operate those types of equipments that are out there on the flight line, to have those sorties turn back around and fly their missions. Consequently, when those aircrafts come back, we need to be able to download that mission data off that aircraft extremely quickly so they can turn around and fly their next mission. And one of the ways that could be done is through 5G as well. Then lastly, as it relates to fleet readiness, is also being able to really look at mobilization of materials. We know about the 5G Smart Warehouse in Coronado. That is going to be a phenomenal opportunity, not just for the Navy, but across all of our forces, where we have the capabilities now to use some of the best of breed technologies from industry, to utilize 5G and to have location-based services inside smart warehouses and out to the flight line that can manage and have accountability and prioritize those materials that are going on to an aircraft carrier, to a destroyer, to an LHD, et cetera. So that way we know not only that the materials are there, but the prioritization of that material that needs to be on that corresponding ship. So the accountability factor and location-based services is also part of that construct.
Thank you, Bobby. So I was just looking up at the screen, and that reminded me that the theme of the entire conference is from data to dominance. And one of the things that we were talking about yesterday as a group is how really the nature of modern warfare is all about data. So from a DoD perspective, Manny, when we think about once the DoD identifies that 5G is the technology that is most appropriate, what are some of the network design challenges or integration challenges that could make that deployment more difficult?
So I would say one of the primary things to focus on is, the baseline understanding that 5G is a commercial-made technology, right? It came out of the telcos. It's a commercially focused capability that wasn't necessarily built initially to support, combat areas, right? It's focused on CONUS. There's a limitation to a lot of the available bandwidth. We've got some flexibility with things like CBRS, but there are still limitations to that, especially as we go further out to the edge, specifically in the Pacific Rim. In addition to that, there are areas from an architecture perspective to focus on how we build out specific solutions or use cases to support, as Bobby was kind of mentioning, how we support different use cases. OCONUS is going to look a little bit different CONUS, right? A lot of these capabilities that we tie back into, like Smart Warehouse, like Flight Line of the Future, Mobile Command Center type capabilities, how we extend architectures to fit CONUS is going to look a bit different, OCONUS, as well as available bandwidth, as it was mentioned. How do we tie back in specifically with the telcos to be able to build out specific programs and bandwidth types to support the DoD and the mission across the board? So I think those are definitely some of the primary ones that we need to and we are focusing on. Outside of that, it's going to be from a vendor's perspective, it's going to be really tied to making sure we're not overcomplicating, as was mentioned earlier, the actual capability, right? Making sure we're not complicating how we deploy these types of solutions and provide different types of capabilities. Oftentimes we can say from a vendor's perspective, we can provide you whatever you want, but sometimes we need something a bit more finite, right? A capability that is not too tight to where it doesn't meet contractual parameters or program requirements, but has a bit of flexibility based on use case, based on technology available, and multiple other factors.
Thank you. So if anyone joined us at the women's panel, sorry, Will, just one second. If anyone joined us at the women's panel, Juliana Vita made a really interesting point that I liked a lot about training and the need to bake in an understanding of basic cyber awareness, cyber hygiene at the earliest levels, right, with our civilian service folks and also with our military. And I know that was another thing we talked about, so I was looking down at you, Will, for some of the concepts in an ideal world, if we could bake in some early training concepts related to network security or even 5G, what would you suggest?
Right, so as we look into like the paradigm shift that we're going into with 5G, you're kind of moving from a lot of hardware-based network functions to things like network function virtualization. I mean, you've seen all of the publications by NIST, Zero Trust Architecture, just thinking about how instead of implementing your networks as if it were a castle and moat, you assume that you're breached already. Like, you already have nefarious actors within your networks, so how are you going to deal with that? How do you deal with someone that's already seeing everything? How do you essentially limit folks to the information on a need-to-know basis such that they're able to complete their mission, be flexible, but be secure? I think it's this really fun juxtaposition that we've posed just now, which is like, okay, everything's going to be really open, it's going to be easy to use and things like that. But then you talk to a cybersecurity professional and they're like, oh my gosh, we cannot do this. This is going to make us so vulnerable to every single attack, and the PLA is going to be in our ranks and fun things like that, People's Liberation Army. So I think when it comes down to basic awareness, there's like that cyber awareness training that everyone is required to take, but I think we can go a step beyond that because it's kind of that older network implementation, whereas we're kind of on the bleeding edge here. So we need to be able to understand basic concepts here, as well as be open to new technology. So y'all brought up a good point. I really like your phrase here, Bobby. Modernization of mobilization, and Manny, you brought up agility for technology to adapt to all of these fun use cases that you just listed. And there are so many more. I'm sure I can ask anyone in the audience all of the missions that you do, and I'd love to see how 5G can help you. I think 5G would be a great tool in there, but the great thing about, I think, as we move towards these software-defined and cloud-native networks and kind of getting folks into that higher level baseline as our technology progresses, is leaving open and creating a workforce that's open to innovation and supporting all of these new technologies and all of the use cases that may come up on a minute's notice. In the past, maybe you can wait 4 weeks to get equipment to support a larger footprint, but hopefully now, with the 5G technology, you can do that in hours, minutes, seconds, I don't know. So,
there was something else too from a use case perspective, but also really from an innovation. I want to follow up with what Will just said. When you look at 5G, it's more than, again, the waveforms, and we talked about cybersecurity and zero trust. The elephant in the room from an RF standpoint is spectrum management. It's being able to understand what your RF footprint is, who's your interferer, who are the interferers, and are you interfering with your own network? And what I mean by that, I've had some great opportunities here on island and also at Nellis Air Force Base and other bases where we're doing some RTSO capabilities. RTSO stands for Real-Time Spectrum Operations. It's actually a platform that's a program of record for our Navy. It's on every single Navy ship, and what it does, it provides the capability of knowing when you are transmitting, when you're not, from that standpoint. But even more importantly, when you're not supposed to transmit, or who are the interferers in your respective mission area. So from that standpoint, I think it's really important to understand not just the cyber piece and the zero trust and 5G and the other waveforms, but really to take ownership of our spectrum, understanding that there's different types of architectures from public to private, roaming in between public and private, from flight line to public 5G networks as well, the spectrum management, and then the spectrum management to the device, actually. So when you think about it out at the flight line or on a peer-side communications network, you have your public network and you have your private 5G network, but are they interfering with one another? And you don't want to have that at all, right? So you don't want to stamp out one another. So understanding that the spectrum management capability, network slicing, is also part of that in QoS.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point in terms of dealing with contested environments in general, right?
Yes, indeed.
From a DoD perspective versus what we see in commercial, contested networks, contested spectrum is definitely something that's a major point of focus, but it's a really good point, Bobby, because we want to make sure we're not contesting our own environments as we build out these new capabilities and technologies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hope you're not coming away with the idea that 5G is magically going to solve your problems. Obviously, it's just going to be another solution for you to leverage as you complete your mission. But I think what you're talking about plays towards that idea of resiliency. So as you have another path to complete your mission, I hope that 5G will kind of offer new ways to do that, or even just kind of do that in a way that's familiar to you. Like, some people kind of what's the right word? Have a knee-jerk reaction to some things that are new just because we don't understand it. But if you kind of do your due diligence, you'll find that there are a lot of analogies between how you operate in 5G in a software-based space as you would in other networks in a hardware-based space. So, instead of your hardware switches, maybe you'd have a virtualized switch somewhere in the cloud, which you can push out to your on-prem mechs and other things like that. And obviously, you bring up a good point as well, Bobby, with interoperability. You're not going to get rid of the other systems, so how do you get all of them to play together nicely so that you're not shutting out other folks who might not be as familiar with the new technology? I think getting that, really having this new technology meshed together with things that we already know puts us in a better position to lean forward to problems of tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah, the integration of legacy systems and platforms is critical. It's
Right.
fun to deploy new technologies, new network architectures, but if you can't integrate with the legacy, you're stuck, right? So I just want to encourage the audience. We have the question up here. So if you do have any questions, please send them through the email. We have a lot of time available for questions, and we want this to be a really interactive and dynamic session. So if you have any questions, I encourage you to please put them in here. Do we have any questions yet?
Yes, we do have a couple of questions from the audience. The
Okay.
first one, the panel has already touched some on the spectrum issue, but do you have any additional thoughts on solving the spectrum issue to get full capability from 5G networks?
I'll go ahead and take that one. So I mentioned real-time spectrum operations, RTSO. That is a program of record for the Navy. What I will say is our firm and others that are out there, we are working very diligently to be able to not only manage spectrum, and what I mean by managing spectrum, I really mean manage spectrum, being able to adjust on the fly different frequencies that really, when you look at different missions, you're really planning the mission. So you start talking about mission planning and what specific frequencies and bandwidth will be required out at the edge. There are companies that are here. I'm not going to name drop or anything like that, but I've been around and I know some of those that are in industry that we're working with, and some that are just doing some amazing things around on-mission planning. And what that really means out at the edge is that you have your user device or devices, and being able to mitigate when you are the interferer and when you're not, and being able to adjust using AI and ML. And I'm not just saying AI and ML because that's the buzzword, but the platform does exist where you can change the frequencies and the bandwidth in real time according to the mission. So imagine if you're out there and you're doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you realize you need to change not just your mission, but you need to change your frequencies in real time. That is the benefit of having a 5G network and utilizing some of these industry capabilities, like an RTSO. Even though that is a Navy program of record, and that is for the Navy, there are other opportunities that are coming up where we can utilize some of those technologies that we're using for the Navy into a cross-coalition platform.
If I may add a few other buzzwords as well, ORAN, Open Radio Access Network, to employ these applied machine learning models, I will say. I don't think I've actually seen artificial intelligence yet, but applied machine learning and software-defined radios, where you have that end-to-end management of that network to include what spectrum you're utilizing, and just to your points there. Thank you.
I'll add one other thing in terms of also understanding the specific use case at times, right? Dependent on the use case, the scenario, and the requirements, if there are spectrum issues that are keeping you from gaining full capability of that specific 5G network, if it's we mentioned smart warehouse type scenario, if you're more near edge than far edge, being able to layer in other capabilities to support the overall requirement, like Wi-Fi 6 as an example, to be able to layer in where you don't have full spectrum, but you are closer back to the core versus the edge environment to kind of support the overall solution is something that should also be considered.
Yeah, and I do have some stories, but I don't want to take away from the other questions. So if you folks are wondering how we've kind of deployed 5G spectrum or 5G systems in the spectrum environment here locally, please feel free to follow up with me. Thank you.
Do we have another question?
Thank you. The next question from the audience. Some say 5G is a solution looking for a problem to solve. We want it, we know we need it, but perhaps there could be greater clarity on problem statement messaging for the case for 5G. Any thoughts?
I'll go ahead and take that one too. Again, the buzzword is 5G, right? It's another waveform. 6G, by the way, is quickly nipping at our heels as well. So from that, thinking about being, could be a greater clarity to a problem. The message is clear. We need resilient communications. The Navy, the Army, the Space Force, every branch and the agencies need this capability, and we need to also have a resilient architecture. So when putting my architecture and systems engineering hat on, when you are architecting these networks and looking at the specific use cases of the customer, understanding the bandwidth constraints currently, understanding that where we are today and where we want to go and to have 4K and 8K capability out to the edge for video surveillance to be able to reduce collateral damage at the edge. These networks have that capability. It's what the challenge is being able to use our test beds and test these scenarios and use cases out so that we can say to you, yes, this does work, and we can operationalize this infrastructure globally across the coalition of forces of NATO and so on. So if we think that, no, 5G is not the answer to all problems, neither is Wi-Fi 6 or Bluetooth, right? Or Link 16 for that matter. However, it is another waveform that we can utilize and maximize, provided that we've done our strategic, tactical, and operational testing like we've been doing here at Joint Base Pearl Harbor and other locations here in Indo-Pacific. The other piece I will say too is EMPs, right? How do we harden our networks? So we're also looking in that arena as well. It's great when we have power, but when we don't have power, what happens when we do get hit with the EMP type 1, 2, or 3? What happens then? So these things are being tested at the Fort Wood Chukas, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, et cetera, in real time, so we can understand how these networks can be resilient out there in the field.
Right, and I'll just add in terms of messaging. So I really like the phrase solution looking for a problem to solve, but I wouldn't describe 5G as that. And here's why, is because we talk all the time about how we want to leverage the commercial goodness out there. Well, there is so much internal research and development dollars happening from industry to develop technologies for use on 5G. So, of course, it's not going to meet maybe some specific, very niche DoD requirements, but I think it'll help you get a lot of the way there so that you're not just going in the dark here, creating your Frankenstein solution, which we all know and love, which doesn't play with anything else. So I think if we really want to leverage all of the great research that's going on out there, then we have to jump on this train. It's just a matter of how much you want to invest in that. So, 2 cents.
Yeah. We should definitely focus on the problem statement most often, right? Which is, as you mentioned, Bobby, resilient communications, right? It's oftentimes a layered approach to provide multiple types of solutions or capabilities to make sure we've got a resilient resilient problem or solution to whatever the problem is. So it can be seen as just another arrow in the quiver, but utilizing, as you mentioned, Will, right, the innovation centers and the test beds to work with the vendor space and jointly across organizations to focus on how do we solve this problem, how does this enable us to provide better capability. Some use cases may be a little, other use cases may be a lot.
That brings up another good point. I failed to mention earlier regarding use cases. I mentioned maybe Moken and Morin architectures. Basically, you have, in the 5G world, you have 5G cores, right? And so from that standpoint, you may have multiple 5G cores in one radio access network. The reverse of that is you may have one core and you may have multiple radio access networks, multiple RANs. There's benefits to either. But when you look at host nations, host-based communications, the coalition of forces, comms, how do we architect our networks that can coexist with host nation networks while we're in theater? So that's another extreme use case, but it's a real use case that I know some of our other teammates are working on right now. So just wanted to put that into perspective too as it relates to roaming from a private network to a public network, in being able to use those types of applications and engineering as well.
I think that question really speaks also to communication within the defense community at large. And that's one of the things we've talked about is the need to really understand, at the tactical level with the warfighters who are out there executing the mission. Sometimes there's difficulty articulating what it is they need. They just know what they can't do, or they know the problem that they're facing. So there needs to be that ability to communicate clearly with the warfighters, the acquisition community who's going to go out and buy the thing, and then even industry who's investing their own internal R&D or going through business development processes to respond to those requirements. And I know that was something we talked about. Well, I don't know if you had any comments on innovation initiatives or kind of intergovernment communications.
Yeah, with regards to actually like communicating between ourselves as the government and I guess our coalition partners. So you bring up a good point with the coalition partners. That's another thing which ties into the question of like, why should we jump onto like this standardized form of communication? That's one way why. Because it's easier to jump on that versus trying to build your Frankenstein and then expand it to make other Frankensteins, right? With regards to innovation units, I would definitely encourage folks, if you have a very good solution, there are great innovation cells within the military. One that I will advocate for and I am working with now is a Tesseract within the Air Force. So I think being able to give your young warfighters voice to be able to support these kind of new technologies that work well for them is something that we haven't seen before. Because typically, we're all about unity of command, right? Like the person with the most stars has the most voice. But I think we'll find ourselves better suited for the future if everyone is given that opportunity to have that voice across all levels. When you kind of diversify that field, diversify that thinking, you'll find a lot more innovation than you would normally the way we've done it before. And I don't think this is just a DoD problem. I mean, this is all across of industry. I mean, this is why we have an emerging leaders panel, I think. It's to give folks a voice where perhaps you might not have had that voice. So I'll just throw a quick plug out there for Adam Grant and his Work-Life podcast. But he's found that intergenerational teams actually have a lot more efficacy than those that are stuck within their own generation. And I think it's because you have the folks with experience working with the folks with new ideas. But that's not to say that the folks with experience don't have new ideas and the folks that have new ideas don't have experience. So just kind of opening up that playing field allows for that innovation, which I don't think we've really seen before until hopefully today.
I also think that our new warfighters are also engineers. They have to be. it's a new fight. It's a technological warfare, right? Being able to have all these smart technologies embedded in uniforms and so on, and that's great, but if you don't understand how to use them or the impact of spectrum, for example, you could be walking into a very serious situation by just having your own mobile device. So understanding those types of impacts. We talked about modernization of mobilization. Another piece to that puzzle I just wrote down is challenging ourselves for enablement. And what that really means is, we talked about this yesterday, is understanding what we're using technology for and the use cases and spectrum and 5G and all the different wireless communications, but also taking it a step further and maybe doing some homework or even asking, the command to provide some additional training around 5G or other wireless communications. And why that's important is because it's not a buzzword. These are real technologies that can save lives, our lives, your lives, right? So the more you understand, the more capable you become, the more enabled and empowered you become as well for the fight.
I really like that idea. Sorry, Manny, I'll go quickly. That every warfighter is an engineer. So that kind of talks to, redefining our baseline, like what level we need to be at for that future fight, is that every person needs to kind of have that technological experience, and I think it was said, like, every warfighter needs to be a technologist. Yes. To be able to understand that new technology. How do we employ that in the scenarios that y'all face every day? And I'd just like to thank all the folks in uniform today for their service, because as an engineer that supports the warfighter, I personally would not go to the front lines, but I want to give you the technology that enables you to come back safely from those front lines. So being able to understand that, being able to leverage that technology in the most optimal way, I think that's the way we fight in the future. Go ahead, Manny, sorry.
No worries. You stole a little bit of my thunder, but that's okay. But yeah, the term in term that you utilized in terms of every warfighter is a technologist. When we talk about the edge, you guys are the edge devices out there, right? You're carrying all those components and all those devices that are consuming all that at the edge, be it tablets, be it AR, VR, any solution or capability that you're taking out with you in the field. You are the far edge. You are the tactical edge. So that kind of ties back into that. Every warfighter is a technologist. Every warfighter is an engineer, in terms of not only collecting information, but how we kind of pre-process that, because it doesn't happen just once it hits compute, right? Oftentimes that has to be processed prior to hitting compute. So, just piggybacking off of that for sure.
Yeah, and if you allow me just one last piggyback. So the theme of the conference is data to dominance, and I'll just throw a quick plug for 5G, is that, with every warfighter kind of being that data gatherer as well, and kind of giving us the information to win that war of the future, the war where knowing things a few seconds faster is the difference between life and death. I think 5G is well equipped to do that in certain aspects, and of course with the amount of data, the amount of processing that you need to do, and the awareness that you need to have across the forces. I mean, it's an enabling technology, so all of the use cases we listed there, all of the things that we want to support y'all with, 5G is one of the ways to enable that.
I think Colonel Lee Cassidy said it earlier yesterday, these networks have to be deployed ease of use. It doesn't mean they're, it means just that, ease of use. And when you're integrating these technologies together, we have service women and men that are learning these technologies, and it's not easy. But as we're building them and putting the training manuals together and being able to articulate and take screenshots and putting these manuals together so that when they are forward deployed, they can deploy a 5G net under 11 minutes, and it can save, not just the mission, it can reduce the collateral damage. We have real-time situational awareness and command and control to make the right decisions for our warfighters.
Just to piggyback off of that, right? It's not just how quickly someone can stand up the technology. Oftentimes it's going to be how quickly can we stand this down so we can move, right? That's part of that process we focus on from industry, is not just how quickly can it be deployed, how quickly can we pull this back down and move based on mission requirements. So yeah, definitely agree.
Thank you. Do we have another question?
We do. Will brought up the juxtaposition between an extremely connected and dynamic network created by 5G and the need for zero trust architecture. What kinds of things can security professionals do to avoid impeding on that connectivity while keeping a zero trust posture? Could the high connectivity be leveraged to improve security?
Yeah, so absolutely, I think the high connectivity is one of the ways that you can leverage. So obviously, if you have a bigger pipe, then all of the fun VPN taxes that we typically face will be less. I think if you're also able to apply more automation technology to do a lot of the security, which typically would have been done manually, that's another way to find efficiencies in the systems. And I'm not going to try and pretend to be a cyber expert. That's someone else on my team. But, you know, zero trust includes many tools. And I think it comes down to what kind of mission are you trying to achieve, and what on the continuum of risk, if you imagine a nice scale here, are you willing to accept for that mission? Sometimes you're not going to be able to get rid of your skiff. That's over here. You need that to be locked down. You need that security so that, you know, the Chinese don't know, right? But I think in a lot of other areas, maybe we can help those authorizing officials think about, like, hey, you know, this isn't so much new, it's just we're implementing it in a more agile way. So there's still that analogy to the things that we know and understand now to new technology. So that kind of talks to our point about like that education and redefining our baseline. It doesn't just go for the folks that are new, the 18-year-olds. It also goes across the rest of the workforce, which is just understanding, you know, how the 5G analogies to what they know mean that we can implement all of the securities they would normally in a more agile, zero trust fashion.
You know, to continue that conversation, zero trust policy and posture, we have different types of devices out there in the field. Industry is now leveraging zero trust to embed literally zero trust into these devices, down to the TPM chip 2.0, 3.0. And what that allows you to do is not only to be able to transmit over a secure net, but now the device is locked down as well when you're transmitting. So when you hear the words end-to-end or E2E, zero trust, it's just not the secure wireless going over the net. It's also the device in a posture of zero trust as well. So embedding software onto the device, that's part of it. The other part that I wanted to kind of hone on too is from a 5G core infrastructure standpoint, there is what they call hardening the 5G core, securing the 5G core. A lot different, I'm not going to go into it here, but a little bit different than 4G, but due to the virtualization functions, NFs, that are available within the 5G core, we are now able to harden the core and provide more of a zero trust architecture at the core of the 5G net.
You know, a lot of what we're doing from an industry perspective on this is really kind of guided towards the focus that DoD-CIO has put out, right, in terms of ZTA, and how the trust nothing architecture is going to move how we utilize technology across not just the DoD space, but it will affect the commercial space eventually as well. But it's coming here first, based on requirements. So that zero trust posturing is going to be the main focus area, not just from an education's perspective, but from a technology's perspective, and how we not just layer a security technology on top, but how we innately change architecturally how communications happen end to end, from an electronic signals perspective, through applications to applications, and device to device. So that's definitely going to be the focus moving forward.
Do we have another question?
Yes, ma'am. Things are moving quickly in this theater. What are the 5G successes in the Indo-Pacific over the past 6 months, and what is planned for the next 6 months?
All right, so I can take that. Some successes we've found, we've run the first carbon neutral 5G standalone architecture operations out here in a nice demonstration if you're familiar with the solar tent, mostly because the generator failed. So that's great PR for renewable energy as well as 5G. That's quite the headline. You can find it on the 15th Wing publication site. In the next 6 months, we're looking at more development, rollout of our actual private networks. So that's going to happen, as well as more capability. And love to get into that more after this talk.
One of the other successes is the 5G smart warehouse in Coronado. I believe it's going to be a cornerstone to not just the Navy, but also across all branches. Because what we're doing is being able to leverage, yes, 5G, but also the converged environment of Wi-Fi 6 and other RFID and so on technologies. But now we're looking at it to be also a test bed, right? To be able to say, we mastered the 5G smart warehouse with our partners. But now, how can we extend this network for other use cases? Again, going back to what I was referring to before, perimeter solutions, munitions areas, flight line, aircraft ground equipment and tracking and location management, inventory management systems. Because a lot of times, in those that are in uniform, you know that it's paper and pencil out there in the warehouses. It's not as technological as we would like to think just yet, but we're working to get there. So looking at Coronado as a test bed where we can still take care of our 5G smart warehouse and beyond, but also encourage those in uniform to help us build more requirements around that test bed to increase more capabilities.
From an industry perspective, a lot of the use cases we've been discussing up here are definitely things that are well beyond proof of concept, right? We've deployed in multiple scenarios, not just CONUS, but specifically within this theater. So as we tie back to, as was mentioned, smart warehouse, flight line of the future, mobile command center, tactical edge solutioning, that all embed 5G capability, we're definitely beyond the proof of concept phase to where they've tested within specifically this region and deployed in a few.
And I think it's important, I know we touched upon it, but 5G is not just an enabler of communications, it's an enabler of data movement, data management,
Yep.
Moving huge data packets, whether it's full motion video or just large data sets that are collected from these sensors at the edge. Being able to transmit them back to some type of storage capability, whether it's cloud or an on-prem. So Manny, I sort of look to you continuing that. How can we set up or enable cloud architectures to receive these large data sets? What's the best sort of approach from a cloud perspective?
Very good question. So that it's going to tie back to a lot of requirements. I mean, we touched on a few specific areas without mentioning any type of buzzwords, right? Like technical debt or any of the other, older, more monolithic architectures that we see often across not just the defense space, but federal in general. But focusing on the ability to inline a cloud management fabric and framework to be able to support end-to-end communications, right? So as we're collecting all of this data, we want to be able to pre-process at times. Often, especially within this region, we're not, our customers are not looking for a history lesson. They're looking for something more actionable, more real time. So the ability to consume, pre-process locally, and then define the rest of that data set where it may land is completely up to the use case. Maybe it's local, maybe it's in the cloud, but being able to focus specifically on a management framework and fabric that allows that type of collection and communication across all devices and implementations within the environment, focusing more on a multi-cloud by design versus a cloud-first methodology, so that we're able to collect, define, and we're able to, maybe it's AI ops at the edge, right? Where we're gathering that type of intelligence and training modules to be able to define specific use cases. So that's what we as industry are focusing on bringing out We've done that a lot. CONUS, we're bringing it out here, CONUS, in terms of a focus area so that our customers can, as mentioned, not get a history lesson, right? They need that actionable intelligence so that they can communicate and deliver based on response.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I'll be quick, I promise. I like that idea of, having data exactly where you need it. So I guess as a challenge to our warfighter customers is I would think about who actually needs to see that data. What kind of connections do you need to have? What can you have on the front lines versus what needs to go back? I think if we're able to better define that, then we can have a more exquisite solution that really leverages the softwareization of your entire network. I think there's a lot of good tools in 5G that enable that, but yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I had one more, want to have one more response to what's going to happen in the next 6 months. I know we're working very feverishly out in Kwajalein to part of that whole modernization effort for mobilization. I think those that are in this room know that Kwajalein has a very strategic footprint as it relates to our missile defense system, as well as obviously Hawaii as well. But part of this is not about 5G per se. The other part is upgrading our fiber capability, right? So undersea cables that have been upgraded here in the last couple of months with one of the partners that are here today, providing that capability so that way our missile defense systems are at the ready. We know the last couple of days, North Korea has done some interesting testing again, which puts us all on a little bit more of an alert, which also means that our networks have to be at the ready, right? Which means our fiber undersea cables have to be, working in a manner that is no longer just 5 gigs, but maybe along the lines of 1 terabyte per second, right? So it's the resiliency of our networks, both wired and wireless within the Indo-PACOM.
One last buzzword, proliferated low Earth orbit for resiliency. Very good point, and another way to get through that problem where you're at the ready. I think as far as successes, like personally, we've been able to, the Joint Base Pearl Harbor HICM 5G initiative, have been able to link our transportable 5G system with a proliferated low Earth orbit satellite communications constellation. So more details if you see me after.
We have another question?
Yes, thank you. The 5G MECs are proposed for processing data close to the sensors and data sources. Where is the innovation for the use cases occurring, and how can industry with existing production deployments best engage with this community?
Where is innovation?
That's a good one.
That is a good one. In terms of where these use cases are occurring and how we can connect, essentially, and this was kind of part of the conversation we had yesterday. Oftentimes, the innovation centers, a lot of folks from industry are tied into specifically to be able to support a lot of these use cases and based on your requirements. Oftentimes, industry is looking to gain information as much as possible or as much as allowed in terms of being able to work with our customers to support your specific use case. I mentioned earlier, we're not trying to create the most complex capability, even though we technically can provide you anything you need based on, but we want to tie everything back to your requirements. So in terms of existing production deployments, we can kind of talk after the fact in terms of specificity, but there are multiple locations out here within region as well as across multiple Air Force bases, Air Force locations with AFRL and a few other research labs that we are currently working with, and that's just specifically me, right? There are a lot of us out there, not just within Dell, but in industry in general that are supporting specific efforts. If there is a specific request or capability that you're looking for, please reach out, right? That's definitely something we're always looking to support and provide capability around. There are certain regions, CONUS and OCONUS, that are focused on specific technologies. More so here, it's going to be 5G from a DoD perspective. So a lot of the work we're doing out here is definitely tied to it. But I would definitely say just reach out, and we can definitely direct you.
There is one use case that comes to mind, and that is beyond line of sight and 5G as using UAVs as a 5G relay for ISR. It's a very challenging environment, but I know we're working on that. And what I mean by working on that is you have truly a private 5G licensed spectrum, right? And you have your 5G net, so you're not worrying about egressing out to the net to satisfy SAS requirements. And using CBRS. So understanding that piece of the puzzle, now you're looking at being able to have that edge compute in a Humvee at the edge for the warfighter to understand what that command, not the command and control, but the alerts that are at the edge for an unmanned or manned ground sensor network that's forward deployed. This really speaks to the expeditionary divisions that are forward deployed out at Miramar and in San Diego that are testing these types of environments. But the goal there is to use a private 5G licensed spectrum out at the edge, using edge compute, real-time services, using different types of edge compute platforms and 5G as a way to relay comms back to the talk, if you will, and being able to have that real-time situational awareness. So that's another use case that's being tested as well.
Right. And I know I'm going to regret this, but like Manny said, if you've got a really cool solution, please reach out to me. I think we have very great test beds at the Joint Base Pearl Harbor 5G initiative. I mean, we're going to stand up a private one out here on Oahu, as well as leveraging the commercial networks for 2 other locations. So with regards to actual production deployments, come and show us what you got. And I'm not just gonna pony myself up. I'm gonna, say like, go to those warfighter professionals, show them what technology you have, and hopefully through their innovation cells, they can advocate for your technology. And of course, by the way, it needs to play nicely with everything else they use. And here, I like how you mentioned mech. So that really talks to this idea of agility. Teach them how to build your tools at the edge so that they can complete their mission. I'm hoping that whatever tool you have and your existing production deployment finds its use out there in the field. So teach us how to use it. Teach us how to bring it up, and maybe show us how we can use it out in the field. So thanks.
Okay, I think we have time for one more.
Okay, this will be the final question. We've heard a lot in the keynotes at this conference about partners. So much of what we design and build sits well within DoD and federal specs, but without consideration for aligning specs and standards with alliance partners we are deploying and training with, and in whose countries we do exercises. How might we address this?
Wow, that is quite good. How about I take a first stab? So I think I'm hoping with a lot of the development we're doing, obviously, I'm going to say the boring answer, which is we have to work with our allies and partners that we traditionally work with. I also think that that's another reason why we need to kind of tag on to what is going on in the commercial sector, because they might already, that's kind of like a unifying beacon for us to leverage. Like, if you look at 5G standard, 3GPP, the third generation partnership something, I forget it, but you can look it up. If we kind of align with those standards, it's not going to be a lot of the way to be able to complete those communications with other countries that are also following the standards. So I think that's my 2 cents there on how we might approach this. Just as much as possible, we cannot, I hate to say it like this, but DoD the crap out of this in what we've normally done in creating these Frankenstein-specific solutions. What we really want to do is leverage that goodness that's already out there, and I cannot emphasize that enough. I'm probably going to think of a better answer in a few minutes, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this too. I know that in South Korea, on our CBRN platform, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, is now a program of record with the Navy as well. where we've tested and deployed with our coalition partners out there. So looking at the 3GPP standards, Release 16, Release 17, and in this case with South Korea, it's been Link 16 and Link 22 to provide a real time, not near real time, but a real time situational awareness for chemical, biological, high yield nuclear explosive. So from that standpoint, when you're looking at that architecture and real-time situational awareness, and then also disaster relief from those types of real-world scenarios, we are working with our allied partners and NATO and host nation to be able to mitigate not just the network itself, but to be able to provide a real C2 capability. So hopefully that helps address some of the question.
And from an industry perspective, the only thing I'll add is we're doing a lot of work from not just within the defense space, but also on the commercial side of aligning with different types of capabilities that are built out with our partners directly so that we can align that to that specifically, right? We want to be able to provide a solution or a capability that fits within those requirements and needs, regardless of where it may end up sitting. Right? So that's all I'll add.
Yeah, and I did think of something like a little more specific, is if we can kind of move towards that virtualization of our applications and you're kind of not so much thinking about like the transport specifically as it relates to like how it's going to talk to all of the endpoints and everything, but you kind of make sure that whatever it's communicating, you're throwing something common like IP packets. I'm pretty sure a lot of the world knows how to use Wi-Fi, right? So think of that model. That's probably the easiest we've seen in implementation, but thanks.
So I wanted to give all of you the opportunity to have some closing remarks. We're going to do 2 minutes, okay? And I would just ask, as you provide your comments, try to frame it or try to think of it as a call to action. So either to government or industry or even senior leaders who may be sitting here. You know, from an emerging leader perspective, we're on the stage intentionally. We have this platform in this time, so this is your opportunity to share your wish list out with the audience. So, Will, I'll start with you, and then we'll work down this way.
Thank you. I just real quickly like to thank AFCEA for entrusting me to not ruin the final portion of their conference. So very much appreciate that. But I guess I hope you take away that 5G is going to be one of the solutions in your tool belt. So at this point, please get familiar with it. There's likely not going to be avoiding the new technology. So please, as new technology comes out, get yourself familiar with it, but also listen across generations. There are a lot of folks who maybe are new, but just don't have the voice yet. So I would encourage you, if you're in a position to give voice to someone, please allow them to speak and really listen, because you might get that diamond that we're all looking for. Thank you.
Good one. Thank you very much, AFCEA and Stephanie and everyone in the room for taking your time to listen to our panel today, and hopefully it's been definitely educational. The modernization of mobilization is here. These are let's call it what it is, these are very scary times. It's just what it is, right? It gives me goosebumps. I think we should all, number one, be encouraging to one another, speak positive energy. And when it comes to technology and 5G as a whole, let's enable ourselves. Let's challenge ourselves and learn some of the new acronyms, some of the new technologies. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert. That's what we'll be taking care of. But for those in uniform, definitely work with us. Let us know what your requirements are as we ask you, because we want you to survive out there. We want you to keep protecting us out there as we're working hard to protect you as well. And then from an enablement standpoint, I think we need to enable each other a lot better, right? So let's break down some of the barriers between our different branches of service, which I know is hard. Go Navy, right? But from that standpoint, the networks are all siloed. We know that. We have to break these barriers down. 5G could be a way of doing that. There's going to take a lot of work and a lot of understanding. And let's really work hard and work smart together as we face this adversary. And it's not an invisible, boogie monster underneath the bed or anything like that. These are real serious times, and let's still be positive and forward thinking.
First, just want to say thank you to you, Stephanie, and AFCEA. Thank you, Bobby and Will, for allowing me to spend some time up here with you guys. My primary point would be I want to be able to bring a lot of the successes we've done within the commercial space from an industry perspective to not just specifically to this region, but across DoD and federal in general. That's kind of my job, the thing I do. And one conceptual thing that always seemed to work outside of the federal space and how companies and different organizations were able to scale so quickly in terms of capability is the concept of not being afraid to fail. Specifically within an education's perspective or a proof of concepts perspective, allowing yourself or the organization self the ability to kind of not be afraid to fail when it comes to bringing in new capability and new technology so that they can get a full grasp and understanding of what's available out in the market, how industry can support, and how we can kind of build together the specific requirements you need so that we can provide you, from our perspective, mission success. So reach out. We're here to enable, we're here to support, and we're here to support you coming back home safely. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you. I have two sort of takeaways from this discussion. I'm taking notes here. So the first one is, as we have our next generation coming through, the digital native generation, we can't assume that these younger folks understand the nuances of cybersecurity or the complexities of the modern network architectures that we're trying to configure. So there needs to be an emphasis on training and education at that most basic level. And the second point really is everyone doesn't need all the data all the time. So being able to collect large amounts of data is important, but being able to categorize them and set the priorities and set the access levels is just as important, because that helps to enable your C2 decision-making capabilities, which ultimately is what we need to do, right? So again, I want to echo all the thank yous to our panelists here for your time. Thank you to the Hawaii AFCEA chapter for giving us this platform as part of the conference. Thank you to AFCEA International for your emphasis and support of the Emerging Leader Program. And I'll say mahalo nui loa. Thank you all so much for sharing your time here. I hope you go forth and do well, and I feel very optimistic about not only our group, but the future of what we're doing here for the fight. So thank you.
Aloha, folks. My name is Brandon Lester. I'm the Executive Vice President of the AFCEA Hawaii chapter, and I'd just like to say thank you again to the panel, Stephanie, Manny, Bobby, and we're missing a Y, so we'll make it Willie. On behalf of AFCEA International and AFCEA Hawaii, thank you for participating. I've been on the stage in a panel like this, and it's invaluable in how we share our message. This panel stands alone, even if it's not an emerging leader panel. The technical discussion was excellent, and thank you again. For the folks in the room, the emerging leaders out there, this could be you. You could be on the panel here with us. We're a tight-knit community. The groups of emerging leaders throughout the country, throughout the world within AFCEA are a really strong connection point, and I can't advocate for it enough. So once again, please come up, speak with the panelists after this, find any of us that are part of AFCEA, and we'll gladly share the benefits of joining with the emerging leaders. So on behalf of AFCEA Hawaii and AFCEA International, this week, in lieu of gifts, we have been making donations to the Friends of the Windward Wounded Warriors. And that may sound familiar to folks that have attended other panels, but it's a really important cause for us here on the island and within this community. So thank you all.
Thank you.
I have some coins, the last few left. And as we close out here, we have one more session after this, and I'll invite our MC up to share the last few details of the conference. Thanks all.
This concludes our panel. Thank you for your attendance. At 1200 hours, the Air Force Chief Information Officer, Ms. Lauren Knazenberger, will be our lunch keynote speaker. You can find the remainder of the schedule on the TechNet Indo-Pacific app. Thank you for your attendance.